Time for a tale from the middle. My name's Bobby Judo, and while I am not nearly as famous as I like to think that I am, I'm probably more famous than you think that I am. And this is where I tell stories from my 10 plus years as a local celebrity in my small corner of Kyushu. This is medium size in Japan. So, in 2015, I put out a book in Japanese called Sekai ga Nihon ni Muchu no Wake: Why the World is Crazy About Japan. And that in itself is material for another couple of videos at least. But the book was full of all of these short little sections about cultural differences between Japan and other countries, mostly the US. There were lots of them. But the one that got hands down the most attention was the one where I talked about tissues. See, whereas in America, I thought tissues were used mostly to blow your nose and not really for much else. In Japan, tissues are everywhere and they're used for everything. People hand out packages of tissues attached to advertisements or flyers, or at least they used to before Corona. They'd hand them out on the street, and they're used for everything from dinner table spills to sweat to after-sex cleanup. And since I published this book, I've heard a lot of debate about whether or not Americans also use tissues to wipe up afterwards. But in my personal experience in America, we did not. And in my personal experience in Japan, for that particular purpose, tissues are not ideal. They tend to stick. Anyway, if you're anywhere near as interested in this topic as Japanese TV executives were, you can check it out in this video up here. But the one that I'm doing now is not about tissues. It's about the time that I got invited on a national late night talk show called Yoso de Iwan Toite to discuss my book, specifically the tissue section. See, this show, Yoso de Iwan Toite, every week they tried to pick out a certain theme to focus on. And the week that I was on, the show's theme was roughly something along the lines of the current state of international sex. So there were three guests. There was me and my lack of tissues. There was a journalist who wrote articles about other countries and their red light districts, and keeping perfectly in line with the theme, there was a failed politician who was there to talk about the financial barriers that prevent anyone but the very rich from running for local office. So she went first, and she was very interesting. She talked about all of the requirements that you had to meet just to be allowed to run for office, all of which cost a whole lot of money. And then she listed the costs of advertising and campaigning, which were so high that they essentially kept the rich in power and disenfranchised the poor. But who cares about that? They were more interested in hearing me talk about the TV trope of teenage boys whacking it into socks and married couples sleeping in the wet spot, which I did. And then the sex journalist had his turn to share his research and tell them what was supposed to be the highlight of the entire show. That Japan, being the visionary country that it is, had pioneered a certain sex service that was catching on in sex industries all over the world. From rough and ready Russia to naughty New York to the sleazy streets of Sydney. Now, I was hearing all of this for the first time in real time right there on the show, so I was hanging on his every word. What was it gonna be? Some high-tech tanga technique? Some cutting-edge sex bot? A 48-some? Nope. The the sex service, the to aru pure that he was there to tell us about, the one that Japan had used to revolutionize the way the world went to town on one another, was the handjob. Now, before you write this off as me not understanding the situation or try to make excuses for him, it was very clear. What he said in Japanese was tekoki, which means a hand job. Just a plain old, sad old hand job. And because I was learning all of this in real time and reacting exactly as I would have reacted had I been sat on my sofa watching TV at home, I did something super unprofessional. I said very loudly from where I was sat directly next to him, "No wake nai yan." And it stopped everybody dead in their tracks. The show took a little break, and he had to turn to me and go, no, seriously, it's very popular overseas. For example, in parts of the world where AIDS is, and again, I jumped right in to interrupt him, and I went, "What do you mean Japan invented the hand job. Please point to a country, no, a period of human history, nay, of human evolution that doesn't feature the hand job. And he had literally no response. The host of the show, this guy, he had to step in and say, no, Bobby. He didn't say that. He didn't actually remember my name. He stepped in and he said, no, I think what the journalist means to say is that Japan developed the concept of the hand job as a transactional sex service. To which I replied, na wake ne yang. Prostitution is literally referred to as the world's oldest profession, and hand jobs have always been on the menu. To pretend that Japan deserves the credit for bringing the hand job to the attention of the global prostitution market in 2015 is to disrespect the long storied history of the hand job and its contribution to global civilization. But that was the last bit of handjob pushback that they were going to get from me, because by now my brain had gotten over the shock of how incredibly stupid this claim was, and it had caught up to the fact that Japanese TV, especially in 2015, was all about celebrating the myth of Japanese exceptionalism. Hell, that was the same reason that I was there. You could even say that the whole thing was one big hand job. Anyway, I knew what was going to happen almost immediately after the recording wrapped because I'd seen it happen before, and sure enough, when the show aired a handful of weeks later, they'd completely edited out the parts where I objected to his revisionist sextory and just aired his handjob claims unchallenged. They'd also edited out about 95% of the section with that woman talking about politics, which tells you just as much about where Japanese TV's priorities are. I never went on that show again, although I did work with the host once more later, and I never saw that journalist anywhere else, so I can only assume that he went back to researching his stories overseas. Although I would argue that if you are paying your sources, that's a violation of journalistic ethics. Fun fact, I did run into that local politician once a few years later. She was on the street, handing out campaign tissues. That's all for today. If you find this interesting, please do share it. If you'd like to hear more like this, you can click all the buttons that will let you subscribe and find out when I post a new video. And if you don't want to wait for another video, you can consider following me on Twitter at BobbyJudo. You can also catch my weekly podcast, Japan by River Cruise, which is brand new every Friday at japanbyrivercruise.com. I am on Buy Me a Coffee. Any donations received there will go back into the show. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.